Walt, wow, oh wow. I feel like we were transported back to the 90s with Sir Mix-a-Lot because baby's got back because Lyft is back in autonomy. This week, Lyft announced a deal with Waymo. And if you can believe it, the unthinkable happened. Uber and Tesla did a deal. And another unbelievable, Waymo was cleared for takeoff at SFO. Adjacent. Is this the version of California sober?
First of all, I think the back that baby has is different than Lyft being back, as I recall that song. And yeah, California sober is probably a good explanation for, the version of their airport where you have to go in San Fran, but we'll get back to that, or we'll get to that later. Let's first start, Grayson, with the thing that sent Lyft stock up 20%, sent Uber stock down 5%. We finally got this deal between Lyft and Waymo. I mean, on one hand, I want to pat myself on the back because this was part of my Lightshed predictions to start the year. We did this massive report, big predictions for 25. This was part of one of the predictions. But on the other hand, as things died down, we kind of fell asleep on this. Remember, earlier episodes of the podcast, where's Lyft? What happened to Lyft? And then we just basically stopped asking. We fell asleep on Lyft. And David Risher got the deal done.
He did. It was like we were playing a game of Where's Waldo, and we stopped looking for Waldo. And in that case, it wasn't Waldo, it was Lyft. But the market that I correctly called, or we correctly called Nashville, Waymo's going to operate there. They're going to operate on Lyft with a catch. Here's the interesting part. Non-exclusive deal. The vehicles will be available on the Lyft network and the Waymo network. That's a really interesting turn of events.
I don't know if it's fully non-exclusive, meaning that, I'm not sure. When we say non-exclusive, that implies that Waymo can come in later with Uber. I don't know. Maybe that is true or not true. But we do know that it'll be a hybrid market. There are similarities and differences with Phoenix, as our listeners may know. In Phoenix, you have Uber and Waymo on separate apps. So it's similar in that way, but it's different in that, in Phoenix, Uber has their own Waymo cars and the Waymo One app has their own Waymo cars. So they're effectively two separate fleets of cars in that market. Whereas the plan for Nashville is it's going to be one shared fleet with integrated technology. So I think a difference there.
There is a difference. Who's going to own the fleet? Do you have any insights into that?
I mean, like we saw when we were in Austin, I think Waymo will own the fleet. I think the question that we've always had is how much is, Lyft can be on the hook for the financing of that fleet relative to Uber. My guess is, based on the structure of this or what they've described about this transaction, that, Lyft is not effectively paying for the financing of these cars, where that might be the case in Uber. Again, we haven't seen the contracts. We don't know for a fact. But I think in that case, Waymo continues to own the cars, which is, I think, that they have in every market where they're partnered with Uber.
Well, Waymo is going to continue to own the cars. Lyft is going to manage them through their Flexdrive subsidiary, which we've highlighted many times. And not to be funny, is this Lyft flexing their Flexdrive muscles?
We've talked about that a lot. I mean, you've done interviews on Road to Autonomy in terms of the importance of this third leg of the stool, the fleet management. Lyft owns this in Flexdrive. Uber outsources this through a variety of partners, some of which they have minority stakes. Maybe they have got takeout clauses for those companies. Could be a key component of what Lyft is bringing to the table, but also perhaps this technology integration where they can share a fleet. Now, I don't know what that means for future markets. If Lyft gets future markets, will it evolve like Uber did, where it'll be like an Uber only and not have a Waymo One app as we've seen in Austin or some of these other markets? Or do you think that the future model for Lyft going forward, if they do more markets with Waymo, would be this kind of joint approach that we've just described?
I think it's a joint approach because if you look at all the public statements that David Risher, CEO of Lyft, has made, every interview he's done recently over the last 2 to 3 months, he's highlighted Flexdrive. So I view it as a package deal where Lyft is trying to create more value for Flexdrive.
That's true from Lyft's standpoint. So they would probably want to continue that. And from Waymo's standpoint, I think they want to make sure that ecosystem of, charging and servicing continues to proliferate. It's interesting, we've always talked about Uber as being the one that wants to fragment the market in terms of the multiple autonomous partners. Waymo is the one that's effectively fragmenting the servicing market, right? By a variety. They had Avis. They also have like Seattle and Denver, where they haven't yet announced the partner. So I'm sure they'll either diversify or add more partners there. And again, Uber, can continue to play a role there. But it's one of those win-win transactions. It took a while. And Grayson, Risher actually bought $100,000 of stock on September 3rd, and this deal was effectively announced 2 weeks later. And the stock moved 20%. So you typically don't buy stock with, material non-public information. So, and by the way, this thing was probably this deal was probably sitting in the background for months and months and months. Do you think there's a possibility that like Waymo kind of rushed in the last couple of weeks and said, okay, we're ready to get this deal. We want to get this deal on the tape. I mean, what's your sense on the timing and why now? I mean, there's no doubt that a transaction like this has been taking a long time. Waymo is, Google is moves very slow in general, but it's just interesting timing, I guess.
It is interesting timing because if you look at the filings before the latest purchase, the last time Mr. Risher bought stock was May, so there was quite a big time difference there. And when he was touting the stock purchases weeks ago on TV, he was saying because he believed in the strength of the company and where they were going over the long term. But looking at this, and this is pure speculation, I want to emphasize, pure speculation, perhaps Waymo said to Uber, we want this to be a non-exclusive market, we want it to be a hybrid market, and negotiations broke down, and then Waymo called up, don't laugh, 1-800-LIFT. Hello, Lyft, we want to do a deal. And Lyft's like, whoa, we're back in the game, let's do a deal. I'm just speculating, maybe that happened.
I mean, it feels like that because I don't think Risher's the type of guy that if he had the information would have been trading on that. So my guess is, again, it was probably something that they worked on for a long time, and then for whatever reason, it came to a conclusion. Going back to Phoenix, Grayson, aside from, identifying that, again, Uber and Waymo have different fleets, I think you have a little history corner for us in what the origins of Phoenix were that I think most people have probably forgotten about. I know I have, and this was a shock to me when you pointed this out.
A lot of people have. I was watching TV, and they even forgot it on TV. This is not the first deal that Waymo has had with Lyft. And it even caused me to put a tweet out. The first deal goes back to 2019 for 10 vehicles operating in Phoenix. So technically, this is the second deal between Waymo and Lyft, not the first. We're correcting the record for the folks that watch TV.
And so do we know then what happened in Phoenix? So you started in 2019, there was 10 cars, that trial came to an end. I guess then Waymo did the Waymo One app and then ultimately brought Uber in later with, again, a separate fleet.
It was very interesting because I went through the archive of the Waymo blog and there was no announcements after that. There was no public statements after that. It just kind of tapered off. So perhaps it was truly just a pilot, but why did it end? We don't know.
So it's different time, different era. They did 10 cars then, completely different tech stack. I don't even know what cars that they were using back then, nor do I care. Probably going to use, Grayson, you want to chime in? What was the car that they were using back in 2019?
I do. They were using the Chrysler Pacifica minivans.
Okay, well, maybe I can find one of those on eBay. That would be a nice relic to have. I'll stick it in the front yard and, get comments from my guests. But so in this, for the market that's coming up here in Nashville, what do you think in terms of number of cars that they're going to launch with and which models? Do they have enough Jags to launch this? Because I think they're talking about 2026, right? So are there any Jags left by 2026? And how many do you think they're launching with?
I don't know, but I will say, if you're going to put something on your front lawn, you better be careful because I threatened to do an open pit fire in my father-in-law's front yard and he had a meltdown over the grass. So be careful with that aspect of it. But if you look at the Nashville market, you cannot look at the Nashville market without looking at politics. There is a governor's race coming up in 2026. The polling today, I know it's a ways out, indicates that Senator Blackburn, who is running for governor, will be elected governor in November 2026. If Senator Blackburn is elected governor and becomes governor of Tennessee, you have a Zeekr issue because Senator Blackburn is a China hawk, very outspoken on that. With that political angle in mind, the vehicles that I see initially being the Jaguar I-Paces, if there's any left, I state that, if there is any left, and then eventually that becoming a Hyundai market, depending on what happens in the Savannah plant, based on the current political situation that we're seeing between Hyundai and the Trump administration. And as for vehicles, I am going to say, based on the Austin launch, 50 to 75, maybe 100 on the high side to start over the first 3 to 4 months of opening that market.
Right. And I think ultimately Lyft has talked about getting to hundreds. So I would say by the end of 2026, you're getting to hundreds. And by the way, if you're getting to hundreds by the end of 2026 in Nashville, combined with all the expectations we have with existing markets, you need Zeekrs and Hyundais. And I would guess if there's an issue with Senator Blackburn that, basically you could redeploy some of the JAGs into this market, in order to satisfy whatever those requirements might be. And unlike Phoenix, you don't need this duplicative fleet. So it's a more efficient way to service a market by having one shared fleet.
And when you look at the market, this is very important to highlight because you and I did the work on this when we were in Austin. Nashville is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. They are currently having energy issues. Is there enough energy there today to scale this fleet? And do we need to look for if Lyft hires an energy specialist in Flexdrive for the Nashville market?
The question that you put forth is really just the question for Flexdrive and can they execute? And Flexdrive has historically been as a servicing company for car rentals. It's very different than what they're doing for autonomous fleets. So this is going to be, I think, a very important market to watch for Flexdrive and ultimately Lyft. And if they can execute well, then that can be replicated and gives Lyft kind of potentially an edge in terms of additional markets that are out there. In the case of Uber, Uber might be fine. Maybe they have 3 or 4 JV partners and one of them execute, but there's nothing like the control of it being 100% owned subsidiary where you can grab the guy's neck and wring it for not getting the job done, as opposed to being the 30% partner. You're on the board, and you're trying to get them to invest the dollars. I think that is, you can't underestimate that. We'll see how that plays out. I still question Uber's strategy of not taking this in-house.
Well, this is not the 70s. You can't wring somebody's neck without getting in trouble. There's rules in HR. We'll put that there. You said Uber. Let's ask the $1 million question. In your opinion, what does this mean for the Uber-Waymo relationship?
First of all, as a stock analyst, I love the fact that it continues to create volatility. There's clearly people that are always very certain about what Uber and Waymo's future is, and we see them obviously state these views, I guess, on CNBC, but also we see it reacting in the stock, being down 5% on the news. And I just harken back to Austin and the Yipit data, and everyone's like, oh, this is such a great thing for Uber, and every new market's going to be an Uber Waymo market, and then the very next market was Waymo 1. And then okay, 1 or 2 other things happen, and you see the stocks move. So I think, it's good in terms of those of us that are trying to understand what we think the next catalyst can be and, which way those stocks are going to go. So I guess I continue to expect that to continue. It's also funny to hear people denigrate Lyft, which we saw in a couple of these programs based on its relative market cap. I mean, you're excluding the kind of Uber Eats business, Uber Freight, the global business. The bottom line is just like AI is going to disrupt industries, right? Autonomy is going to change things, right, dramatically. So the platform that they have is certainly capable of enabling an autonomous future. So I don't, think that people should count these guys out just because their market cap happens to be a fraction of what Uber's is in the market.
Well, you should go on the CNBC and debate this, because you're right. And another angle to point out that when they harp on the market cap, they acquired FreeNow. Now, Lyft is on the European continent, so they have the ability to scale globally now, which they didn't prior to the acquisition.
That's exactly right. In terms of when you're viewing the scale, it's about the markets that they're going to get into. Again, maybe the importance of this third leg of the stool, the fleet management, the charging, any number of things I think can occur. So look, the bottom line is, I guess the next question is going to be the next market to launch. Is it Waymo 1? Is it Lyft? Is it Uber? Is it both? I mean, that ends up being a big question. And every incremental market, my view on this has been pretty consistent, is not necessarily your confirmation of where the end game is for Waymo. And I've said this before, I'm not even sure that the current co-CEOs will ultimately be the one to make the final decision. We'll have to see as this business evolves, as they get to, what I consider a science project, not because I'm trying to denigrate what Waymo is doing. They are a leader. They have the great product, but they're still outfitting cars with expensive sensors. They haven't hit production and scale volume yet, right? So as they get to the next phase in their business, we'll see who's making the decisions, and I think the path is not yet clear.
I agree that the path is not clear. Waymo has, outside of the technical abilities, outside of the manufacturing, Waymo still has a lot of hurdles that they have to overcome. Let's stay on the Waymo theme here, and let's switch gears to SFO Airport. You and I have gone back and forth, and on the previous episode, we broke down the politics of why we thought it'd be a long time. And lo and behold, two things happened this week. One, we got a post on X from Mayor Lori of San Francisco praising Waymo's expansion to SFO, saying it's an economic driver. But Walt, there was a catch. It was at the Kiss and Fly station. You cannot get curbside Kiss and Fly. Huh? And I did the homework on this because you teach me these things. You're a very good teacher. 2 stops, 7 minutes. To me, that's a giant pain in the you-know-what. We're in a you-know-what. This is half-baked.
We've had this debate before about San Francisco Airport, and you call me the fitness director for saying, I don't mind doing the walk to the garage. I think that's fine. But I think I'm aligned with you on this. When you're telling me to walk and then get on a minibus or whatever it is to go to a separate location, I think that's unfortunate. Hopefully San Francisco will see the light on that and move it to the right location. And I think hopefully their citizens will pressure politicians or whoever it takes to do that, to get that done. I still don't want to take away, it's still a good milestone, right? Just like when Waymo got the permits in New York. Yeah, there's a lot of wood to chop in terms of, getting additional permits, getting the charging in order to get New York commercial. But this is a good milestone. And, the bigger picture is I don't think I can get to SFO without getting on a highway. So we're starting that process to getting the big unlock, which is highways. And so does this change your view on when the highways get turned on in California?
It does, but before, I just want to give a little bit of history and context. When Waymo first got airport access at Phoenix, you had to take a train. So there is precedence. But San Jose Airport, the director of the airport has publicly come out, it will be curbside. So you're right. If I'm a tourist and I'm going to fly 3,000 miles to San Francisco, I want to ride in a Waymo trolley car, go see Fisherman's Wharf, I don't want to take a stupid train. And then I don't want to have to go through all these different back roads. To me, that hurts you want to talk about economic tourism boost. Well, that hurts it. You need to unlock highways. You need to unlock curbside to really unlock the economic benefits that's going to have for tourism. To me, looking at this is a clear indicator Waymo is getting closer to highways. And I'll even go on the record here and make a prediction for you. The first highway to be unlocked will be the Bay Area. It will not be Phoenix, as many predicted. It'll be the Bay Area. And I predict by December 31st, 2025, Waymo will be operating paid commercial highway service in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Look, I don't know what the issue is, but even whether it's California's first or Phoenix's second or vice versa, I would assume the unlocks are going to happen pretty quickly. I just can't help but wonder, are they waiting for a new sensor stack either in the Zeekrs or the Hyundais in order to unlock the highways? Is it still a technical issue? And then let's put Zeekr aside for a second. Let's assume, yes, that's the case, because there's some better LiDAR in the Hyundai that's going to hit the roads. Are they going to have to spend some period of time testing the Hyundais on the road? Or does the testing that they've already done with the Jags in California qualify? How do you think that process works?
The Zeekrs, I know we want to put aside, but it's important. The Zeekrs are currently highway testing in California, both in Southern California and Los Angeles area, in San Francisco area. Many public videos and photos documenting that testing. Now, going to the Ioniq 5s coming from Hyundai, yes, those will have to go through rigorous highway testing. I'll say 3 to 4 months. And I do believe you are correct. I don't have anything to point to, but I do believe it is a sensor issue, because we do get inbound from listeners and viewers to say, oh, it's an insurance issue. I don't believe that is correct. You can insure a human to drive on the highway. I believe it is a sensor issue.
But the Jags are also testing on the highways, Grayson. So why wouldn't you throw them in the mix as well?
I don't know if the Jags are capable with their current sensor set, and perhaps there is a risk that Waymo does not want to take something in that sensor set that they're not telling us.
I think we're obviously only speculating. We have no idea what the situation is going to be. We'll say if that's the issue, better safe than sorry in terms of these companies, I'm sure, have that culture of safety, which exists clearly at Waymo. But let's assume that that's true, that for whatever reason, these 5,000, whatever the number is we're up to now of Hyundais can't go on the highway. It's kind of going to be a weird fleet management situation where you're going to have to keep the preponderance of, cars in these local areas. And then when you get assigned for a highway ride, then you have to send the Zeekr or the Hyundai, because I don't know. I mean, that sounds a bit complex.
It will be complex, or this is a forward-looking thought. The Jaguars eventually migrate to cities where Waymo has no interest, or there makes no point putting highway service in.
Like Nashville, which also has potentially a senator that doesn't want Zeekr cars on their streets. First of all, let's go back to that for a minute, because I kind of moved on to the next topic. But do the states have the right to pick and choose what cars are going to be on their roads, or ultimately, if we get to a national framework, can the national framework prevent that from happening? And as long as the feds are good with Zeekrs on the road, that they can't be excluded in these individual markets.
Yes, the national framework could, technically, depending on how the language is written. So I want to highlight that. Depending on the language written, yes, preempt and allow those vehicles on the road. However, got to put on the politics act, because that's what they do in D.C. They play politics. Senator Blackburn is a staunch, close ally of the president. She has the president's ear. So that has to also take into account.
Well, we'll see how that plays out. So far, your unforced error on Zeekrs hasn't really played out quite yet, right? They're actually hitting the road. So as of now, it hasn't actually hurt them.
But I don't mean to interject here, but I do want to point this out. If you look at the drone market, I know it's adjacent, it's autonomy. At some point, we'll expand Autonomy Markets into drones. Chinese drones, mostly manufactured by DJI, are in the process of being 100% banned in America. So there is precedent.
Sure. I mean, you can pick and choose anything. How about I just pick TikTok, which just got extended to mid-December in terms of a law that's on the books that says it's, it shouldn't be here. So bottom line is Zeekr's still there and they're starting to ramp, but both of us are certainly looking forward to Hyundai, assuming that they don't step on their own toes with their political issues. I wanted to go back to the highways, though, because that is the final component of this prediction I made in my Lightshed predictions, the highways. This is going to be a big unlock. I mean, the Lyft deal, I'll be honest, was a little surprised that Uber was off 5% on the Lyft deal. I'm like, did you really think that, it was just your business to win going forward? Anyway, I digress. If they unlock highways, that's a much bigger deal, because that has a near-term impact on the revenue in some big cities for them, right? I mean, you've already seen the market share that Waymo has taken, San Francisco, LA. You open up airports, those are high-value rides. That share opportunity for Waymo relative to Uber and Lyft is bigger. And when that announcement finally hits, we're live on highways. Do you think we're going to see a similar reaction in Uber stock?
Yes, and I also think you'll see a similar reaction in Lyft stock as well.
Right. It's obviously going to be incremental competition for both until each of these companies figure out how to partner with Waymo in new markets.
But do you think, this is fast forward to the future, if Waymo, let me rephrase that, when Waymo starts to eat into airport revenue share, which is a big chunk of revenue for both Uber and Lyft, does this relationship get perhaps more frosty when Waymo starts taking bigger chunks of that revenue? I mean,
a lot of the stuff we're talking about, Grayson, how do you not expect it? Do we think that does anyone really think that Waymo will never end up on highways? Of course, that's ultimately going to happen. Of course, Waymo is going to take additional share. There's an opportunity, if you model this stuff out in the long term, which we've done, is, does the overall growth in miles from rideshare, whether autonomous or not, create an opportunity for a new player that's separate than Uber and Lyft? And I think, I have certain views on that. And I think Dara actually talked about that on a recent, I think he was getting interviewed by the All In podcast, basically mentioning the same type of thing. It doesn't mean it's going to impact these companies in the near term and the valuations of their stocks based on how people react. But look, this is autonomy markets. Our long-term view is the vast majority of miles driven by rideshare companies will be autonomous. I've got very specific views on where I think it'll be in 5 years, 3 years, 7 years, but like autonomous will represent the majority of miles, I'll just say in our lifetime for, for current purposes, if not much sooner. So, people are just gonna have to come to terms with, which companies that's gonna flow through and how much market share do you really require to justify the valuation that's on the companies today.
It's valid points. We'll be watching. We'll be watching it to see how it evolves. It's not just robo taxis that's going to go autonomous. It's highway. This week we had a video release from Bot Auto that showed them going full driver out, as they called humanless, on a 40-mile run. That's service roads, highways, and basic town roads. Fully autonomous, no human in the cab. They call it a validation run. Big step. What do you make of that?
I think that's great. And I think, Grayson, where you and I have differed in the past on this podcast is I'm less assuming that the technology just works. So when companies like Bot Auto actually take the driver out and start getting on the road, that's meaningful to me. I'm just not assuming that every one of these technologies, actually work. So that's a big milestone. But, you have a lot of companies in this space that are hitting that milestone or getting close. Aurora keeps insisting that they're years ahead, but we see more and more companies take the drivers out and get revenue paying customers or sell trucks or gets authorization. So it's a big market there as well. Same thing. We'll just have to figure out, what the market share differences are going to be and which business models work. But that's huge for Bot Auto. Not a truck I've been in myself. Looking forward to get in one. What was your experience when you were in one of those bot trucks?
I went on that route. I've been in that route. And when I want to clarify, when I was on the route, there was a safety driver and a safety engineer. But I was on that truck on that exact route. Not one intervention. I walked away impressed and said, wow, how did you do this? And Shouty Ho, their founder and CEO, told me all the breakthroughs in agentic AI, which you and I know because we use it every day. And it got me thinking a lot. Looking back on the video that they released this week, they've only raised, and I say only because these are small numbers, they only raised $45 million and they have 80 employees. So how companies that have raised billions of dollars just achieving that when you have the startup that's raised less than 45 million with 80 employees? Do you think we're truly starting to see the breakthroughs? I'm going to use a buzz term, sorry, the breakthroughs of physical AI really starting to take hold?
In the world of wireless or AI, like you kind of get what you pay for. Meaning like I have to spend billions on cell sites to give you coverage so your cell phone works. I have to spend billions on spectrum to give you capacity so your Netflix works on your cell phone. In AI, you have to spend billions on NVIDIA compute in order to get your LLMs to work. In the world of technology though, like if there's better ways to build the software that utilizes the sensor stack, there can be differences in investment. And there can also be, you enter the game later and new technologies or AI were available to some of the new entrants when they weren't just available for companies that have been investing billions of dollars over the past 10 years since DARPA or 15 years or however long it's been. It's just a nature of the beast. It's like, the early money is that's the harder money. The question is like, has that bought companies like Aurora enough of a lead over these companies? Because at the end of the day, like Aurora is showing a video, and yes, the driver's sitting back and he's not touching the wheel, but there's literally someone in the driver's seat because of the relationship they have with PACCAR. I assume there's no one in the driver's seat for Bot Auto in that video.
Nope, and the video's public.
Okay, so you're years ahead, and I get that there's like, vendor stuff and like this is oversimplifying it. But I'm the finance guy. Like I see a driver in one, I see someone sitting in the driver's seat in a car and not in another. And we get this all the time in terms of Tesla, right? Relative to Waymo. Why doesn't that apply in the trucking world? So I think, these kind of visual signals, I think are important. So congrats to Bot Auto for getting that. And I think the more important thing is now is, okay, yeah, your technology's good enough to have that safety driver out, but let's get some revenue cooking with some clients. And who is their vendor that they don't have a PACCAR type situation that's saying don't stick or don't have no one in the driver's seat? Who's the vendor?
They pulled a Don Burnett move, and I got to give Don Burnett, the CEO of Kodiak, a lot of credit. The gentleman, as you know, is getting ready to de-SPAC Kodiak next week. Mr. Burnett, and he's said this many times publicly on several podcasts, including The Road to Autonomy, is that Mr. Burnett did not want to be locked in contractually just to one OEM. He wanted the ability to be able to maneuver. Bot's doing the same thing. They don't have an OEM partner. They bought the truck off the lot. So there's no constraints of what you can and can't do, where Aurora's locked into that.
So there's no control basically in this case in how the relationships work. And then so those that integrate with the vendors will tell you over the long term, in order to get production and make it work and have costs low, the approach that Bot and Kodiak are taking is the wrong approach in the long term, even though it's maybe giving them a solution today that's quicker where you don't have the driver in.
So to push back to those critics, there is Kodiak is the only company in the United States, and perhaps the world cannot verify that because the China data, so I'll say United States, operating driver out consistently 24 hours a day with no driver in the cab. This is not defense, this is commercial operations. Bot just achieved it. So to me, if you're looking at this from your perspective, Walt, there's a pattern here that it works.
Sure, it's a pattern that it works in the near term, right? So then it doesn't take away someone's view that over the long term, being more integrated with the OEMs in how the sale process works and how things break down, that works. Although, I think Kodiak has assured us that, like, if something goes wrong with the trucks are fully, warranted, and the trucking company will fix the parts that are related to the trucking company. So it's not like the warranties are voided, as I think some had suggested to us at some point. So I don't know. Look, the bottom line is, you're right. I'm looking at results where there's not a driver sitting in any front seat, right? And there's revenue. So, like, what else am I supposed to look at? So, it's almost like the onus should be on these companies getting to production to show us how in the long term that's actually going to drive greater profits.
The risk side of me comes out in this, and it just a few things. One, Bot Auto is generating revenue today with the JB Hunt, Steves and Company relationship. And two, they are going to own and operate the fleet. And from the Kodiak side, they're selling those trucks and they're getting a licensing fee. So the OEM stuff, it's going to be very, very interesting. And the reason I use the word interesting, and I'll say it in a delicate way, we still need to know, and we need a public statement on this, what's going on at Volvo Autonomous Solutions. And that, to me, does that validate the reason why you don't want to be dependent on OEM? I don't know. If you look at the Aurora Pack car situation, that clearly validates it to me, but those are just, speculations.
No, I get that, but I think you identified the difference, which is that in the case of Bot Auto, they're taking on the CapEx and owning the truck, so they can make whatever decision that they want. The issue with PACCAR, who's going to sell the truck to the end customer, which is using the Aurora driver, like, that's a different relationship. And ultimately, the point is, over the long term, that may be the business model that succeeds the most. I don't know. Like, we've debated this before on this podcast. I see value in both approaches. I've done calls with, those companies that are involved in this business to understand, and I think there's an opportunity for multiple business models. The point is that in the near term, the model where you're owning it and taking on that CapEx, you're pulling in revenue sooner, but you're also, expending a lot more CapEx sooner. But then the third part of that, Grayson, is like, which you should have chimed in on, is like, yeah, they may be spending the CapEx on the truck, but they haven't spent X billion dollars to develop the technology over the past 10 years, right? Their technology development has been obviously much more capital efficient, whether it's a Bot Auto or Kodiak or wherever.
And then there's the fourth element, which we have not touched on yet, Tesla Semi. What's going to happen when they enable FSD on that? And I say that under the context, and I'm going to channel Gene Wilder from Young Franks on, it's alive! It's alive! Tesla Semi is going on Uber Freight.
I think the bigger story here, Grayson, is I think you buried the lead, which is that everyone's like, oh my God, like, Tesla will never do a deal with Uber, and like, obviously in the context of the robo-taxis. And here you have a deal between two companies, between Tesla and Uber. And, there's some financial incentives. They're going to subsidize the price of these Tesla semis. They're going to integrate into the Uber Freight dedicated solution. So, like, this is more than just kind of a rando agreement. And I think, to your point, Yeah, I mean, I don't think that Tesla Semi is going to be a driver in for an extended period of time. This is like the Trojan horse in getting autonomy into Uber Freight and or just getting autonomy in trucking, and it's just kind of maybe further validation that if you look at this trucking space that includes Aurora, Bot Auto, Kodiak, and others, like Tesla's there. Yeah, are they probably behind where these other companies are? Maybe. Like, getting a truck to be autonomous is, I think, has many different challenges than a car, given the size and weight of the thing. But they're in the game, right? Tesla Semi is in the game.
I love the elegant term you used. You're using your good philosophy here, the Trojan horse. If Tesla Semi is a Trojan horse going on the Uber Freight network, then why would the founder and CEO of Uber Freight, Leo Ron, resign to go join Wabi as COO?
Yeah, I don't. People leave for companies for a variety of reasons, and sometimes you see, like at Apple, you have a flood of specifically AI people, and there's trends to devise from that. Obviously, we had some concerns at Aurora when Sterling Anderson left the company. I think there might have been some additional departures over the course of time there. There's a variety of reasons why senior managers leave: compensation, internal politics, maybe decisions that are made, prioritization. So who knows? I wouldn't draw too many conclusions from that.
Okay, so we'll leave that out. We won't draw conclusions, but we'll watch it. And Bloomberg has reported several times over the years that Uber has looked at divesting Uber Freight. Now with this deal coming online, do you think Uber Freight for the near term, and when I say near term, next 12 to 18 months, remains part of Uber, or do these Bloomberg stories continue where Uber looks to divest it potentially?
Yeah, I have no idea, nor does it really matter to Uber. Uber's a massive company. Uber Freight's a smaller piece. I'm not sure it's like some distraction. It's not going to generate material enough dollars to make a difference to Uber. Uber's not lacking for cash to invest in autonomy. It's just not a topic that interests me. And I don't know if, Uber Freight outside of Uber is going to be better or worse than, than whether it's with the parent company. It's not necessarily a capital intensive business, right? They're just matching rides. It's platform. So it's not like it's a cash burn or a drag on Uber's business.
It's been an interesting week in the autonomy markets. The great fight between Tesla and Waymo is now officially tied 2-2. Well, are we going to have a big week next week? What do we need to look for in the autonomy markets next week?
Hold on. How is it officially tied? The winner this week, in my opinion, was Lyft. Lyft is this week's winner. And I think they deserve to be called a heavyweight now, given this deal. And in terms of next week, you've got the Qualcomm Snapdragon Summit. You've got probably some more conferences. I don't know. I mean, the great thing about autonomy markets is there's always something new that surprises us every week. And this past week was a good one. So hopefully things that generate more volatility. I do like volatility.
You like volatility. You know why? I know why. A little secret, because you like to play basketball and you have to dribble. You have volatility when you dribble that basketball. And what you and I both know, we are here every single week, rain, sun, shine, break it down the autonomy markets. And I can't wait for next week's show. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is autonomous trucking. Walt, until next week.